I'll do it right now.
And welcome back to episode number 64 of Raise the Banner podcast. This time it's actually going to be the right episode number. We've been tossing them around left and right and going out of order and stuff like that because of breaking news. But we are back once again. Your three co-hosts, Matt Couture, Zach Brewitt, Benny Ballgame Dearth. Boys, how we doing today?
Great.
Good. All right, let's jump into it. Since we last talked, which was it last Thursday, Ben? I think it was, right?
That sounds Thursday.
Right. There have been not a ton of news. Obviously, we already had the Mike Vrabel hire at that point. We talked about that in depth last week. But since then, we have two coordinator hires. And that's kind of where I want to start with us. I know for the most part how Ben feels about them. But so, Zach, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Josh McDaniels being hired as the Patriots OC?
I mean, it's hard for me to be overly thrilled because I know who he is and what he brings to the table, right? So it isn't like there isn't that what if factor because I'm pretty sure I know what he's going to bring to the table. I mean, that being said, I don't know who said it, but I saw reports on Twitter about him going to the college level and trying to revamp his style, trying to make it more modern, trying to make it more easily digestible. So excited to hear that, right? That was kind of the talk about at least a lot of the receivers when they would first come up. Was really hard for them to grasp and fully digest the playbook. So hopefully what he brings now is a bit easier to understand and can grasp right away. Obviously, right, Jalen Polk is someone who needs to have a bounce-back season. But overall, I was excited that we have kind of a big name. Brings a lot more, I think, oomph, if you will, for lack of a better term, when trying to acquire free agency talent, like a T. Higgins, for example, or if you're even trying to make a trade target. Right, it's a lot easier to say, hey, we have Josh McDaniels and we have, paired him with Mike Vrabel than it is to say Alex Van Pelt and Gerard Mayo. So for the name itself, excited to see what he brings to the table. But for me to be over the moon when I've been as critical as, towards the Crafts for bringing in another familiar face and bringing in, just another guy they are they've had in the building before. I think that's the only reason why I'm not over the moon. But, that being said, excited to see what he brings to the table. And I'm not really too familiar with the defensive coordinator from Tennessee, but all reports from him are positive there as well. So hopefully they can bring, some violent players, as he said.
Ben, not to kind of go out, but did you see the breaking news down in Jacksonville?
Oh, yeah. Liam Cohen is putting his name back in the ring for the Jaguars head coaching job.
It seems like Balky was the issue, and now they fired him. So now Cohen's like, all right, maybe I'll be interested in the job.
Didn't he just sign an extension, though, with Tampa?
Yeah, he took his name out of the running in Jacksonville. He signed an extension in Tampa, and now I guess it seems like because Balky's out as a GM, he's reconsidering.
Well, what's interesting, though, is wasn't Balky fired 2 days ago?
I didn't heard about it today, but
he was fired after Cohen dropped his name out because it was probably because of that.
Oh, I'd have to go back and look at the timing because I know Cohen took his name out, but I feel like it wasn't like Balky was fired and an hour later Liam Cohen's like, "Hey, sorry, Tampa, I know I just signed the contract, but I want to re-enter the sweepstakes down in Jacksonville."
Well, that's the only thing that's changed since that is he's gone fired. So I would imagine that had to do with it. But anyways, Ben, give me your Josh McDaniels rant. I'm ready for it.
It's not really a rant. I would say so. I tend to be, and Matt can attest to this,
miserably pessimistic.
No. I mean, maybe situationally that might be a correct statement. I was going to say more like I'm pretty gut check emotional in the moment, as opposed to letting things kind of stew a little bit and having an opinion at a later point. I'm very guilty of that. It's a blessing and a curse. But so I've certainly cooled a little bit on Josh McDaniels. And I probably trolled you a little bit in text about my feelings over it, but I don't hate it. I know you asked me, it was yesterday, today, like if Josh McDaniels was like a middling hire, who would have been a bad one? I still don't have an answer for you. But it was encouraging to see that he has seemingly been studying the college game in his last, we'll call it 2 years. It's more like a year and a half, but almost 2 years since he's been out of the NFL. So it's certainly encouraging. I think it speaks to a willingness for him to adapt. He had Tim Tebow as a rookie, I believe, when he first took the Broncos job. And then I'd have to go back and look, but I don't recall who was his quarterback. Did he have Garoppolo when he took the Oakland job? I forget who
he hired. Yeah, because the Vegas job, but yeah, rumor was that
they were in Vegas. I forget. I don't know when they made this.
Yeah, that Dave Ziegler wanted to trade up for Stroud, and he had a deal in place with Houston, and McDaniel said no, and blocked it, and said that they're going to sign Jimmy G.
Well, didn't they have Derek Carr originally, and that's why they ended up trading for Devontae Adams?
Yeah, year one he had Carr. Then they decided they traded for Devontae Adams, and then they decided to go basically away from Carr. Mm-hmm. So they traded him to New Orleans, and that's when they were like, all right, what are we going to do? And supposedly, that was the situation where Houston was willing to trade back and not take Stroud, and McDaniels was like, no, I want Jimmy Garoppolo.
Easy to say why he's fired now.
Yeah, I wonder though, just to play devil's advocate, I wonder what the deal was. I'm just gonna look. So Vegas had the 7th overall pick. So you figured a move from 7 to 2.
What did Houston give? They moved up for Will Anderson. What they give up? I forget where they came from for Will Anderson at 3.
12. So that was a haul and a half. So where is it? So okay, so the original number 12 overall pick
it was Cleveland's.
It was Cleveland's, and that was part of the Deshaun Watson deal.
Correct.
So Cleveland traded. Hold on, I'm trying.
I don't care about the Watson deal. What did they give up to give up the 3?
I'm trying to see.
Come on, you're a research man.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where it is. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. I was looking at. I clicked on the thing and it brought me to a different spot. So it says Arizona traded 1st and 4th round picks, which were number 3 and number 105, for 12, 33, and then 2024 1st and 3rd round picks.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, either way, like, obviously, there's a chance that Josh McDaniels still has a job if they take CJ Stroud.
Possibly.
I mean, it's very possible. But, I mean, to get back on track, go back onto your McDaniels thoughts.
So I've certainly cooled a little bit. I mean, it's probably going to be good for the Patriots in the long run. It's certainly not bad for them. My immediate reaction of it being kind of a meh was like this is going to be his 3rd go around as the offensive coordinator here, and it's like, we've clearly beaten the horse to death 12 times over at this point. They basically went through the exact same hiring process, if not process, but like the sequence of events was more or less the same with McDaniels that it was with Vrabel. They hired their 2 minority offensive coordinators that they're required to. They interviewed. Is it Udinsky? He's like the pass game coordinator in Minnesota. Young guy, part of the McVay tree, I believe. And then basically as soon as all three of those took place, they brought in Josh McDaniels and hired him an hour later. So like clearly, and there's been reports and refutes of reports indicating who made the call on McDaniels, but clearly whoever wanted him, McDaniels was the guy they wanted, because they didn't interview anybody else that's up for an offensive coordinator position. They didn't bring him in. You know, they interviewed the two minority guys and then some random guy that I don't think has gotten interviews anywhere else. At least I haven't seen his name thrown around in the coaching cycle. So clearly it was McDaniels. So it just like that just says to me that they honed in on McDaniels, good, bad, or indifferent from the very beginning, and that nobody else was going to get that job. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You know, I would have liked to see them go out and get somebody like a Nick Caley or Josh McCown. Although rumor is Josh McCown's only willing to leave Minnesota if he gets a head coaching position offered to him, which I don't think he would take any of the vacancies at this point. He's better off just staying in Minnesota. So, you know, in the long run, is it going to be good? Probably. I was just looking forward to having somebody new calling plays. You know, I'm sure Josh will be fine, but I was ready for somebody else, somebody new, somebody different.
Yeah, that last piece is the same for me. Like, it would have been nice to have some fresh blood in the building and not just another name recycled. I mean, at least Vrabel didn't come from the Belichick tree, you know, so that's where I stand on it.
Just to quickly go back off, it seems like Cohen agreed to an extension, but it never signed. And then, like, the Bucks have been trying to get in contact with Cohen, and Cohen just hasn't responded the last day.
Are you reading the Schefter tweet?
Him and Raps.
Oh, I just read Schefter's. Yeah, it says the team had made multiple efforts to reach out and has not been able to get in touch with him. Cohen is currently in Jacksonville discussing the deal to become their next head coach.
Well, good for him, I guess. But no, for Josh McDaniels, for me, like, there's all this extra shit, like, you know, he's been around here. This is his third stint, all that. Really, all I look at it is,
you gotta say,
is he a good OC?
There it is.
And will he have success here? And
I mean, he should have success. I mean, especially if he's studying the modern college game, you would assume that he could, you know, obviously Drake May is only a year removed, but Drake May is obviously a modern quarterback. You would assume he could have success with that. They just got to give him, you know, tools to play with.
Originally, I gave it a C+, B- grade. Maybe it's like exterior things are convincing me a little bit more to like it, and maybe it's just like natural to kind of try to sell yourself on it, I guess, a little bit. But there is. Sorry, I just got a notification that I'm trying to read. There was conversations with Zolak the other day. It might have been yesterday, I believe. And he brought up a fairly optimistic viewpoint. And it was basically like, you know, the Tom Brady offense was designed around Tom Brady, but the Tom Brady offense changed throughout the years. They were a much more spread out, high-flying offense when they had the weapons to be that. When, you know, back in 2007, Randy Moss, Wes Welker, Gronk, Hernandez. Gronk was not at that point. Who's the 2007 tight end?
2011 tight end was Gronk.
No,
Gronk.
07.
07 was Watson.
Yeah.
Ben Watson. There you go. Yeah.
Infamously taking out Champ Bailey in 06, and I will die on the hill that was a touchback, 100%.
Anyways, and so, you know, I look at that, and, you know, maybe he is able to adapt more. And then I think prior, like, I did get caught up a little bit more in, like, the importance of the system. That being said, I still preferred to go a more fresh route, a newer option. But I always felt like Josh McDaniels would not have been a bad hire at any point before it became official. And now after, I still don't think it's obviously a bad situation. Obviously, one of the most important factors, which you don't necessarily have this be a big factor in the decision, but it is a factor overall, and it's that he's probably not going to be leaving anytime soon. I think it's pretty safe to say that, like, bearing something completely unexpected, he will be here for at least the next 4 or 5 years, like at least, possibly.
Unless he leaves on his own. But yeah, because I would
Yeah,
imagine.
but I don't see it's for like I don't think he's going to get another head coaching job for like at least another 5 to 7 years. And that's
if anybody gives him a head coaching job now at this point, they're
exactly. And so
desperate.
that was obviously a factor in it, and it's nice that if he does come here and have success with May, there could be some continuance year after year and not have to worry about him leaving, which was obviously a big factor with a lot of people in the head coaching decision. They wanted Ben Johnson, and myself included to an extent, because you didn't have to worry about the OC leaving. Because even if the OC leaves, having Ben Johnson, you're not really worried about it. That being said, like obviously there was a little bit worry about how updated his system is. But if we take the reports for what it is, he seems to be able to adapt pretty well, and that he has been trying to update his system. So that's why I moved it up to a B. I think it's a good, solid hire. I don't love it. Like I said, if you gave me even now the options of everybody that's realistically available, he is probably not my pick. But I still think overall it's a good pick because he's young. He's still pretty young. He's going to be here for a while. He's smart, and we know that he can not only develop Drake May, but with having a defensive head coach, he can essentially just take the entire keys to the offense, and Vrabel doesn't really have to worry about it. And that will free Vrabel up to be who Mike Vrabel is as a head coach and just kind of the overall leader, of the organization and getting things back on track.
Yeah, and listening to Josh on, is it Edelman's podcast, The Games with Names? Is that who? Yeah. Listening to him on his podcast talk about Drake May. I don't forget when exactly it was, if it was before the draft or just kind of watching over the course of the season, but you could tell how excited he was about like who Drake May is as a player. And you could tell he was like, if I get the chance to work with this guy, it's going to be, he didn't use these words, but like, it's going to be like, it would be fireworks. And now that he's there, like, again, the issue forever was simplify the offense. These people just aren't getting it because he's working with Tom Brady. He had the ability to make it as complex as he needed to because Brady could digest anything. And now it's different, right? So now, again, we've kind of all talked about it, but the idea of him going back to college and making it more simplified and coupling that with, again, Drake May, who he himself has talked about being as excited as I've maybe have ever seen him talk about a young quarterback. That got me excited after, kind of Ben, you talked about it just being a bit more meh about another stint of McDaniels, another familiar face with the Crafts. So taking that part out of it, I am, excited to see what happens. And especially as I mentioned, now you have the name recognition of, some of those big free agents who otherwise may have not come here because, they don't know who AVP is and they don't know what Gerard Mayo is capable of. Now you are familiar with, Vrabel's body of work, and obviously everyone knows about McDaniels too. So we'll see what happens, but definitely a lot better names.
Well, that's going to be a big part of it in free agency too. I mean, obviously 1 year ago, and we saw it with the OC just interviews, the selling point a year ago was what? It was, okay, we don't have a quarterback. We have a first-time head coach that people don't think don't have confidence in, and we have no OC, and we don't, we have cap space, but overall the team didn't have much of a selling point. Yeah. Not that the team in general has a ton going for them at this moment, but you now have a proven, reliable head coach. You have a proven, reliable OC. You have a young, up-and-coming quarterback in place, and you have a shit ton of cap space to basically sell, players on it, whether it's T. Higgins, whether it's Chris Godwin, Josh Sweat, whoever it may be in free agency, to say, hey, like, we're building something here, come be part of it. And they have the building blocks now in place, much more than last year, just to attract these guys that maybe they don't have to, and while they still should, but maybe they don't have to like spend through the teeth, through the roof just to get him here because there's nothing else attractive about the situation.
Yeah. Do you buy into any of these reports? I mean, AJ Brown's a bit different, but like Jeffrey Simmons, for example, having the connections that he has with Mike Vrabel, like, do you buy into anyone?
Yeah, I mean, to an
Hopefully they
extent.
coach their way
I
out.
mean, if you're Tennessee, like, you know, Jeffrey Simmons is going to be what, 27, 28 years old.
Yeah.
They seem to be further behind in the rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they could get a good haul for Jeffrey Simmons, like, I'd have to imagine it's something that they would consider. So
You have the cap space to re-sign him too. or
yeah,
if he
I mean,
needs an
he's
extension, I'm not
extended
sure.
for at least another couple of years anyways, but you know, I certainly buy into it. I buy into, you know, looking into older like players that came from Tennessee over the last few years.
Mhm.
Christian Fulton and Elijah Molden, both secondary guys that are both, I think, with the Chargers this year, but are both the free agents. Both of them make sense. They both could help this team defensively. They're both coming off pretty solid years, and they both played with Mike Vrabel under his time in Tennessee. And I mentioned it to Ben last week is what, you know, one of the most important things for Vrabel is going to be to establish his culture here. And one of the best ways to do that is to bring in players he knows that will work in that culture. Meaning what? Players that had coached under him already.
Yeah.
So I would fully expect. I threw a list out there on X last week, I think. But I would I listed like 7 or 8 names, and I'll be like, I would bet a lot of money that at least one of them becomes a Patriot. And this was just free agency names, but becomes a Patriot this offseason one way or another.
Yeah. Those Tennessee teams weren't bad. I would love to have at least a handful of the names you mentioned. I saw names on Twitter. I saw your name on. I would love to have, like, at least a handful of those names for sure. We could definitely use the talent, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another type of guy. I heard this a little bit on Zolak and Bertrand today, talking about the type of guys that Vrabel would want to bring in, and a guy that they don't currently have, but that they likened a guy that they need, was Kevin Byard, safety that Vrabel had in Tennessee that the Patriots kind of lack, because you need leaders on defense, right? And Kevin Byard was that when Vrabel got to Tennessee. Obviously he had other good players, but Kevin Byard kind of wore that hat. He wore kind of the Devin McCourty hat of like the more modern day Patriots. He was similar to that of like what Rodney Harrison did for the Patriots 20 years ago. He was that loud, physical guy, that wasn't going to take any shit from anybody on the field or off the field. And that's, Matt, to your point, that's kind of the culture piece. He wants guys that are tough, gritty, hardworking, that are also going to hold other guys accountable. Which, not to say that Mayo didn't really want that, but it felt almost as if he kind of looked beyond the type of player that he wanted on the roster and felt like the guys he had on the roster could buy into his style of coaching, as opposed to finding guys who would hold the players accountable. And he tried, and admittedly so, he tried to be more of a player's coach than he probably should have been. So it's nice to hear that Vrabel wants to bring those guys in. Obviously the talent speaks for itself. Jeffrey Simmons kind of feels like the guy that kind of fits that mold. But hopefully they can bring some of those guys in. And now that we know that he more or less has some sort of semblance of a final say, with Wolf kind of sort of reporting to him in a capacity, is, maybe we start to see that pretty early on. And, he can find frameworks to go get a guy like Jeffrey Simmons, who is 27-ish. And he's entering the second year of his contract. And by NFL standards, it's relatively inexpensive. I think he makes roughly 23.5 a year on his current deal. But because he's got a history, he was in Tennessee for 6 years. I feel like he's a guy that, because he's been a head coach and he's had success at the NFL level, guys know what they're going to get with Vrabel, and that's going to be an incentive to I'm not going to say necessarily take like team friendly deals, but if they get competitive offers from the Patriots and they know Vrabel, I think that bodes well for bringing some of those guys in.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a much more attractive situation just on the coaching staff.
Yes.
And you know, McDaniels has a little bit of a shaky reputation around the league, but that's more been as an OC. I mean, a head coach. As an OC,
his track record as offensive coordinator it speaks for itself.
Yeah. So, shifting defensively, Terrell Williams, who was the Lions D-line coach, he worked with Vrabel in Tennessee. Vrabel supposedly looks at him very highly. What are your thoughts on his hire and what he can bring to the defense?
I like it. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, and I'll kind of combine the two words, but adaptability and versatility in his coaching style. The Lions defense, and I know that he wasn't responsible for all of it, but the Lions defense was decimated by injuries this year. Sadly, probably 90% of the reason that they were one and done this year. But that I felt like the defensive line was not ever really a problem in Detroit. I mean, obviously they lost Aiden Hutchinson like midway through the year, something like that, to a season-ending injury. And while obviously he's a all-pro caliber player, the defensive line, it was kind of like next man up mentality. They were obviously you're not as good without Aiden Hutchinson as you are with him, but they still got after the quarterback at a respectable level, even without their best pass rusher. So I think the ability for him to coach guys up to fill big shoes along the defensive line, speaks pretty highly to an ability that now that he's going to be running a Patriots defense that, I mean, quite frankly, at this point is probably worse than their offense. And that's pretty tough to do. But, I like what he was able to do in Detroit. And again, the familiarity, the seamlessness of being able to work with Vrabel because he has that history, I think will add to the continuity of the coaching staff. And hopefully he can be, a voice on the defense to what Vrabel's trying to accomplish. Because obviously Vrabel can't be everywhere on the practice field at any given time. So it's, it'll be Vrabel's scheme more or less, because obviously him being a more of a defensive-minded coach, he's going to have his own ideas. But, I didn't have any bearing, any gauge on anybody who could become defensive coordinator here. But after the hire and doing a little bit of digging on him, that one was certainly a solid get for him. And I think he's going to fit in really well.
Yeah, I think for me, I mentioned earlier, I don't know anything about him outside of the fact that he was, D-line coach for Lions and has some history with Vrabel. That being said, he mentioned he loves violent players on the field, right? Looks for those nasty kind of bulldog types. So excited to see what he does with a guy like Keon White, for example. Barmore, if he's healthy enough to play, and hopefully he is, but and other guys like that. So excited to see what he does on the D line. Obviously, he has, like I said, a history with Vrabel, and Vrabel, as you mentioned, Matt, speaks very highly of him. So he knows more than I do. But I'd be interested to see what then happens with the other position groups, like secondary and linebackers coach. I think that would be where I would just have a lot of more question marks, because again, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I would be interested to see who they bring in as a DB coach, for example, or a linebacker coach, because I don't know if they made any moves with the coaching staff there. But like I said, from what I've heard good things. Ben, you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the D line not being an issue for the Lions at all last year. So if he can coach that team up and that position group up, then good things ahead, and obviously just has to extend that to the entire defense now. But excited to see what Vrabel or what Terrell Johnson has.
Terrell Williams,
sorry.
No, I mean, like you guys kind of said, I feel like we would be lying to people if we acted like, oh, we're some Terrell Williams fan club gurus where we know everything about him. We don't. On the surface, it looks like a solid hire. It's a wait and see type of evaluation on him. He's got a ton of experience. He's been coaching for 2 decades. And I think he started in the college ranks and worked his way up into the NFL in 2012, I believe. He was with obviously Vrabel for a few years. He was down in Miami. I want to say Godchar was in Miami with him, if I'm not mistaken. So
I think he was talking about that on Twitter today.
Yeah, he has a little bit of an overlay with him, supposedly. So, there seems to be nothing but good reviews on him.
Yeah.
Coming from Detroit, we'll see exactly what type of defense they played. I know Vrabel liked to mix things up defensively. I believe the Patriots ran zone about 44% of the time last year, which is on the higher side of for teams, and the Lions were actually a little bit above that, which kind of bodes well more for Christian Gonzalez, because I didn't want a defensive zone coach.
Yeah.
A lot of talk was like a Robert Saleh coming in and as the DC, and I didn't like that because he's a zone guy. And when you have a guy like Christian Gonzalez, you don't become a zone defense because, well, you're just doing a disservice to having a player like that. And so, I think you'll probably see a lot of zone on the higher end, similar to what we saw the last few years, maybe even in a little bit of higher. And I think you'll see the best come out of players like Keion White. Keion White obviously was on the record talking about he really likes to be coached from a tough, hard-nosed coach, and that's why he really liked Belichick. And I think Vrabel and Terrell Williams will seemingly be exactly what he needs.
Yeah.
So if they can add defensively and allow Keion White to be the best version of himself, and that is to be working from the inside of the line of scrimmage, not the outside, they can put him in a better spot to succeed. Obviously, this will kind of, for Terrell Williams, and with Vrabel being the defensive guy, it makes you wonder how they'll approach things defensively. Are you going to see Vrabel become more leaning defensively, as we kind of saw with Belichick over the years? He always favored defense, over offense, and prioritizing that over offense. Will we see that from Vrabel? Will we see that from Terrell Williams wanting to go that route? I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of, now that we have it all set? We know that Elliott Wolf is still around. Groh is still seemingly around. Highsmith is still there. And then now we supposedly have, is it Cowden from? He was with Vrabel.
Yep.
But Vrabel seemingly has final say on the roster now. Between Vrabel having final say, McDaniel's in the mix. How do you, how are you picturing the approach in free agency and the draft? Do you think it's changed at all since what they need versus, the adjustments now of who's leading the charge?
How much say did Vrabel have in Tennessee?
He was not the GM. So supposedly that was part of the reason why he got let go. He wanted Cowden to be the GM. And they decided not to. They promoted somewhere else, and Vrabel had specifically said, I don't think that this guy is ready to be a GM. They basically chose the GM over Mike Vrabel, and now that GM has been fired 12 months later.
And that GM was the one who traded all those players, right? Like AJ Brown, for example, and
I think it was him that traded AJ Brown. I know Vrabel was very against trading AJ Brown.
Yeah, no, I'm asking because
that's a situation that gets confused. I remember when they were talking about hiring Vrabel, everyone was like, "Oh, he traded away AJ Brown." Blah 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 blah. I was like, not only did Vrabel not have final say in the roster, he didn't want that. It's documented that he was very much against trading away AJ Brown.
Yeah, I'm asking because if it was, that team was pretty good, and they made a lot of good, draft picks, and made a lot of good moves. So I didn't know how much say he had in Tennessee, and I was going to say if he has the same sort of say that he has here that he had there, it'd be I'd be very excited. But obviously it sounds like he has more say here.
Yeah, I
so-
mean the roster went downhill, and that was the
Yeah.
biggest issue in Tennessee.
Yeah.
When he came in, it had a pretty good roster on the rise. And in the 2 years that they went 12-5 and 11-6, or 12-4 and 11-5, or I don't know, whatever it was. They had pretty good rosters.
They did.
They had some talent defensively. They had a decent line. Obviously, they had Derrick Henry. And they had, Ryan Tannehill leading the charge. But that's another conversation that we obviously got into a little bit last week, Ben, was like, there was talk that, they're just going to be a run first team. Like they're going to ruin May. They're not going to use them right. All this type of thing. It drove me nuts. And Ben, for the most part, agreed. It was, when you have Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry as your two main offensive pieces,
You run the ball.
common sense says that you run the ball.
Yes.
What do you
One
do that with?
generational talent,
You
one
do that
person.
with the arguably the best running back of this generation.
Yeah.
I said this to a couple of my other buddies, and he tried disputing it. I think it goes LT was the early 2000s. Adrian Peterson was like 07 to 2017, and Derrick Henry has been the last 8 years.
Yeah.
He's this generation's best running back.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and so when you have that, you're going to use it.
Of course.
So when you have the best player at that position in all of football, you're going to use him to the max of your ability.
Yeah.
So common sense tells us that not only Josh McDaniels, but Mike Vrabel will say, hey, if we have a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top 5 quarterback, we're going to use him like a top 10 quarterback or a top 5 quarterback. We're not going to just run the ball for the fun of it and just hide our quarterback that we think is really good.
Yeah.
That makes absolutely no sense. It's a dumb way to approach it. If we get into the season and we're weeks into the season and they're barely using May, you can come at me all you want, but they're gonna go with what's the best of their ability, and that's going to be Drake May. Maybe they add a very good running back, and that maybe adjust things, but it's just that whole line of thinking is always kind of
my questions earlier were more so to say that I would hope that this would knock Elliot Wolf down a couple pegs and in terms of who has final say, because
seems like he's the number 2.
Yeah, and then Vrabel be number 1, because what I was trying to figure out is if Vrabel had final say at Tennessee, then I would like him to have final say here, because that roster was far better than this roster. And I know that Elliot Wolf didn't create this roster, but some of the moves he did make were highly questionable, to say the least. That being said, if Vrabel brought over his boy and someone that he really wanted and thought highly of in Tennessee and really wanted to be promoted into that GM role, I do hope that he has at least some part of the final say, and it sounds like he will. So I would, again, much rather have someone like those two calling the shots in McDaniel as well.
So part of the tricky thing is going to be, last year's draft, we had, a new head coach and a new GM that were using the scouting platform from Coach Belichick. They used his system of how they scouted things. When they took over, it was 2-3 months before, you don't have time to revamp the whole system. So they went off that. Now you have a situation where you brought in Coden in. The good thing for Coden will be he's coming from New York, and he'll have, seemingly a pretty good idea of what they've been thinking, right?
Yeah.
And they pick ahead of us, so he's going to have a pretty good idea of where their heads are at. There's no way that they're not, by essentially the end of the season, that they don't have a lot of talk in their, front office of what they're planning to do at the top of the draft.
Right.
So he'll have a good insight there. And then obviously you got Vrabel, who's the final decision maker. Now it's obviously now going to be Elliot Wolf's scouting system. So, that's the one thing that we'll have to see how things play out. If if Elliot Wolf wants, I don't know, player A and Cowden wants player B and Mike Vrabel is the one that's going to make the decision, it's going to go, okay, you know, do I trust Elliot Wolf because this is his scouting system and his scouts have told him this? Or do I trust Cowden because he seemingly probably trusts Cowden at this moment more than Elliot Wolf?
I would trust Cowden just based off his performance last year, Elliot Wolf's performance last year. But that's just me.
Yeah.
So no, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
I was just gonna say this feels similar to how things were set up when Bill was here, where Bill more or less had the final say, and that he had guys below him that, you know, he trusted to some degree when it came to scouting, decision making, but ultimately it fell on his shoulders. It feels a little bit of a return to that. And so I'll be curious to see where, specifically in the draft, you know, I think that Vrabel's probably going to have some more pull when it comes to free agency in his conversations with Elliot Wolf, because Vrabel is obviously more boots on the ground, right? He's got the relationship with the players. He knows the style of the guy that he wants. And there are guys in the league that he coached that I'm sure he would love to have. So maybe he's got a little bit more pull there. The draft is interesting because supposedly Elliot Wolf has a pretty good system. There's been some reports out that guys like the platform and the style of which they're scouting players and what they're putting emphasis on, what they're studying, what they like, seems to be more in line with kind of the voices in the building. Having said that, you've got Cowden, whatever you say his last name is, being essentially right behind Elliot Wolf, like number 2 to Wolf, but I guess number 3 overall, as weird as that's going to say. And of course, Cowden has a history with Vrabel. He was interim GM after, so I went ahead and looked it up. So John Robinson was the executive vice president and GM from 2016 to 2022. He was fired in December after they lost the AFC championship game. I don't know why it says he was fired. It indicated that he was fired after an AFC championship game loss, but they would have. The season is still going on in December, so I don't know how that happens. So could have just been a weird timing thing. But so obviously, so then Ryan Cowden is the interim GM. So there's a history there. So I'll be curious to see like what those conversations are like, because obviously Vrabel and Cowden have a history that working together. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. But it feels a little bit like a return to how things were with Bill, where there seems to be like the head coach in this case is being propped up in a stronger capacity than Gerard Mayo was, to where Mayo, I don't know how much of a voice Mayo had in the room. Vrabel's going to have a pretty strong voice, which I think is, you know, that all comes back to like the why I'm excited.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something else after.
No, like I can tell you're like waiting for like, what's next?
No, I mean, like it's going to be interesting to see how things kind of play out in that sense. I mean, the sad part is like, we won't really probably know, like, you know, how things end up playing out there, because you kind of don't hear that aspect of things and that end of things. But my next question for you guys is kind of a simple one, and it's, you know, we heard Schefter say it was Mike Vrabel. We've heard talk that it wasn't Mike Vrabel, that it couldn't have been Mike Vrabel, but whose decision was it to hire Josh McDaniels?
I think it was Kraft's.
I lean Kraft. I think that the easy way to say that it's Kraft is the two guys that were hired first, Vrabel and McDaniels, are Kraft guys. Obviously, Kraft knows Vrabel from his playing days, And of course, there's a long history with Josh McDaniels. So it kind of strikes me as Kraft, whereas I feel Terrell Williams was more of a Vrabel thing because Vrabel's got the history with Terrell Williams. Am I going to sit here and say that Mike Vrabel was 100% against Josh McDaniels? Probably not. He probably had a favorable opinion of him. Obviously he didn't play directly under McDaniels, but he has a history as a player with McDaniels on the coaching staff. So I'm sure that played into it, but I'm sure in his heart of hearts, Vrabel would have probably wanted somebody new, maybe with maybe with a different system. So it feels a little Kraft-y. I don't know if I fully buy into the report that Kraft basically sat, and I'm paraphrasing and using my own words. I just don't know if I buy into the idea that Kraft sat Vrabel down and said, "You're hiring Josh McDaniels, and that's the end of this conversation." But at the same time, he probably was in Vrabel's ear being like, Josh is a guy, and I had this thought earlier when we were talking about McDaniels. Matt, you brought it up that there's no imminent threat of him walking out the door to take a job somewhere else, right? If they had gone with, say, like, a Ben Johnson type guy, passing game coordinator, creative, in 2 years, if he turns Drake May into a superstar, well, 2 years from now, every team with a head coaching vacancy is going to be like, hey, we need a quarterback. You just turned Drake May into a perennial all-pro, and he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. Like, come over here. Like, sure, is there a threat that McDaniels could walk out the door? Of course. But I don't think you have to worry about it from a perspective of, well, if he turns Drake May into a superstar, because of McDaniels' history, he probably has a lot longer of a leash here because of the fact that teams are going to be gun shy because he's failed miserably twice as a head coach. So
yeah, I just don't see a team. I really don't see a team being. I don't know if there's anything he could do with Drake May that a team would be willing to give him a shot anytime soon.
No, but I'm okay. But let's just. Granted, if they bring in the talent, say they bring in T. Higgins, they draft some. They draft a high-end wide receiver prospect in the first, 100 picks, whatever you want to call it, first 3 rounds, whatever you want to call it. And, Drake May goes out and throws for, 4,500, 4,800 yards, 30 touchdowns, like 10 picks. They win 10 or 11 games and they make some noise in the playoffs. Like, that's a pretty drastic turnaround that's a drastic
I know, but
year
it
one.
doesn't.
But what I'm saying, though, is, as we all know, and I know I've watched more just by virtue of the fact that, I'm 50, I've watched more football than you guys have, just a sheer volume.
Okay, don't lie to the listeners. You're 53.
Sorry, I am 37. But
hey, I'm 29 today.
You are. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
It's the last best year of your life. It's all downhill from here.
It's all downhill once you turn 30.
It's like when you're in your mid 40s to 50, you start getting the AARP cards. It's like now that you're going to be 30, you're going to start getting ads in the mail for prune juice.
You've been getting that for like a couple decades now.
That's true. I have been. It's delicious. But I digress. But the thing about so like where I was going with this, right, is there are dumb teams in this league. There are dumb executives that run dumb teams that are managed by dumb ownership. Okay.
Jacksonville.
Dallas.
Yeah.
If Drake May, maybe not next year, but in 2026, if after the 2026 season, Drake May is, Pat Mahomes-esque, I'll just use him. He's the best quarterback in the league right now. If he's in the Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson category at the end of the 2026 season, and I guarantee you teams will be calling the Patriots being like, we want to interview Josh McDaniels because we've got a high draft pick. There's a top quarterback coming out in the draft, and we think we saw what he did with Drake May. Because I think with Josh McDaniels, right, what is Josh McDaniels' history as offensive coordinator in New England, right? He
Great, but he had Tom Brady.
Correct. He had Tom Brady, And then in his most recent stint with the Patriots, it was 1 year with Mac Jones before he left for Vegas.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the Matt, you might know this. You're kind of a historian when it comes to this stuff. I don't know what the time frame is between when he went from like 1 foot in the door at Indy to like basically being like, actually, no, I changed my mind, to then taking the Vegas job. I want to say it was only a year or two in between those two situations. But like,
it was at least 2 or 3 years. I think it was, yeah. It was
Wasn't
definitely,
Indianapolis he was going to take after they lost the Super Bowl to the Eagles?
I think it was Brady was still there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
Brady
it
was
after
right.
he went to the Eagles.
It might have been like 2018, but I mean, either way, yeah. No, I mean, I think what he did with Mac is probably what, you know, fans should look at the most.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that happened with Mac is that people don't realize is, you know, as we can see, he was extremely limited. And he had a really solid first half. So I think when he started out, like, you know, McDaniels babied him a little bit. And then he started letting him kind of get out there more and expand the playbook. And he had some success. But I think because he was so limited, teams were able to adapt quicker. There wasn't a lot to, you know, to change in their approach, and they just adjusted a few things, and he fell off a little bit to end the year. Nevertheless, they were a top 10 offense that year. And the fact that you did that with Mac Jones, who we now know is like a glorified backup at this point.
He's a serviceable backup quarterback in the NFL.
Like a QB 34 in the league.
Yeah, and so, you know, that between that and, you know, you have your best receivers were Jacoby Myers and Hunter Henry. You know, what he did altogether with that offense was pretty impressive.
The receiving core is largely the same as it is now as it was back then, right? Bourne is still here.
Yeah, I mean,
Stevenson's still here.
And Bourne had a career year under McDaniels.
Yeah,
in his first year here, and so it's, you know, it's tough to fully evaluate because McDaniels hasn't had a quarterback besides Brady that has also been good.
Yeah,
you know, he had Tim Tebow. He had Aiden O'Connell for a little bit. He had Jimmy Garoppolo for a little bit, Brian Hoyer for a little bit, Cam Newton, and then Mac Jones. Like,
Jay Cutler's the second best quarterback he ever had.
Mac Jones?
No, Jay Cutler.
Oh, didn't he trade Jay Cutler?
He traded Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall because I don't know if it's because, but then he drafted.
And so, you know, altogether, like, we haven't seen Josh McDaniels with any other quality QB besides Brady. So it's tough to get a true judge on things like that. But as a whole, like I kind of talked about it from the start for McDaniels, it's, you know, they're hiring a quality OC, an experienced OC, an OC that can handle the entire offense, an OC that you know is smart, an OC that you know can develop a quarterback. So, you know, we'll see exactly how much McDaniels can adapt to May and push out of what is probably a little bit of an outdated system, and see what he can bring to the table and adjustments like that. But that's why I give it a B, is just like, you know, you're going to get, you know, the Patriots have at minimum, solid OC.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. And that's why, like, you look at the whole change from last year, you know, I don't think AVP necessarily was bad. I think he's a smart coach. I just think he was a pretty lousy play caller. I think, you know, May developed pretty well. And so, you know, how much you want to, and, you know, not to change gears, but this kind of drives me nuts. The same people that were like, Drake May absolutely needs an offensive coach were the same people that were saying, oh, don't give AVP any credit for developing Drake May because, you know, because Drake May would have developed regardless. And so it's like that. How do those things correlate? If you're not going to want to give the OC credit for developing the quarterback, don't tell me that Drake May absolutely needs an offensive coach to lead the charge.
Yeah. And so just to kind of like button up where I was going with this is hiring Josh made a ton of sense, and I came to I thought in the sense because I thought about it after the fact about that you don't have to worry about the next hotshot guy leaving because again, even if Josh McDaniels turns Mac Jones into a top 8 quarterback, teams are going to look at that and go, well, he's failed twice as a head coach. I just think that it wouldn't surprise me if teams called if that does come to fruition within the next couple of years. There's got an owner out there will be like, we got to jump on this now. But you don't really have the threat of Josh McDaniels walking because he's not the next up and coming hotshot creative mind who may or may not leave for a head coaching job at some point, which is exactly what Ben Johnson did. He was offensive coordinator for only a couple of years in Detroit, and very well could have been a head coach last year. He just, when it came down to it and when he saw what was left, he opted just to stay put, which was, the smart decision. I think that, there's a little bit of craft in there because he knows that if they, by bringing him in, Josh is probably going to be here for a while, which that's really a best case scenario when you've got a young quarterback, because you don't want there to be a revolving door of offensive coordinators and new systems, because then the guy's not going to develop.
No, but I think with Kraft, he very much likes to keep it all in the family. Right. I don't think he, like to your point earlier, Ben, I don't think he came in with Vrabel and was like, you have to sign him no matter what. But I do think that his mind was, for the most part, made up that he wanted to bring Josh McDaniels in, mostly for the fact that, he might not have the highest ceiling, but he's definitely leaps and bounds better than what we had before. And his floor is way better than potentially anybody else out there. So, his floor is much higher, and his ceiling might not be as high, but at least it's, less risk with still a pretty damn good reward. In a season that you really can't afford to risk another lost season. So getting back to the point of am I excited about it? I don't know that I call it excited, but I'm definitely not disappointed for the fact that yes, he's, to your point, Matt, he's a great offensive coordinator, done it before, can certainly handle the entire offense, knows the building, knows the system, knows a lot of the same players, as I mentioned. So I think it was the right move.
Yeah, but all right. I do want to transition and do a little bit of Red Sox talk. Plain and simple, let's just put it this way. Are the Red Sox going to sign Alex Bregman or no?
We got fucking duped, bro. We got duped again.
It's funny, right? So I was talking to Matt about this the other day, and I turned the clocks back. So when was the Juan Soto thing? It was before. It was what?
November, I think. Right?
It was late. It was I think
right after early December.
It was right after Thanksgiving. Because I remember listening to Section 10 talking about how they didn't want the Juan Soto thing to break. While I think it was Carabas that was down in Florida. He's like, he didn't want it to happen because that would just be ironic. And then if it didn't, it happened, I think, the weekend before, which was the first weekend of December. Yeah. But I remember
on average, Mick tweeted out that Juan Soto was signing with the Red Sox on Thanksgiving Day. So it obviously happened way after that.
Yeah. So, for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure he has not resurfaced on X.
I've seen it a couple times, but
so having said that, I remember talking to Matt when it started to come down to it, and we kind of were like, all right, it doesn't really feel like Juan Soto is going to come here. We can kind of feel, cautiously optimistic that he might end up in a Red Sox uniform. But I think, at least for me, in my heart of hearts, I'm like, it's probably going to be the Mets because Steve Cohen's not going to let him go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so I remember being like, hey, Matt, wouldn't it be crazy if the Red Sox lose out on Juan Soto and then just don't spend any fucking money for the rest of the offseason? And Matt was like, Ben, he's like, that doesn't make any sense. They're not going to want to spend $700 million on one player and they'll be like, okay, well, I guess we're just not going to be willing to spend money on anybody. And it's been
because it didn't make sense at the time.
It
doesn't mean it makes sense.
It's been about 6 or 7 weeks, and their biggest signing in general has been Walker Buehler on a 1-year, $21 million deal, which is more or less a replacement for Nick Pivetta, because Nick Pivetta got the qualifying offer, which was the same amount of money over a 1-year deal. He just said no. And before that, of course, it was.
Side note, he definitely wishes he said yes. I'm just going to say that.
Nick Pivetta, probably, considering he has not signed with anybody.
He's going to sign like a 2-year, $25 million contract, or maybe $30 million.
At least they'll give you 2 years on like fucking Patrick Sandoval that you signed for no goddamn reason. Like, dude, he's not going to do anything for you.
No, not to get too much, but he got the brace surgery.
No, I know, but
John.
Which means realistically, you're probably looking at May, not August.
Okay.
So he should be back for at least half of the season instead of like maybe being back towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
You'll get 2/3 of the season out of him. But anyway, like the interest, like I look back at that line of thinking, and I'm like, yeah, and like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, yeah, like John Henry doesn't like to spend money. So it's like as soon as he loses out on a generational talent, given the types of players that were available, I looked at it and went, they're not gonna spend any kind of crazy money on anybody. John
Henry was jumping for joy when he got that text that Steve Cohen signed him and not him.
Who?
John Henry. He was like, thank God I don't got to spend money on anybody.
So, of course, they basically made almost an immediate splash. They went out and they got Aroldis Chapman for $10-ish million. And then all we could focus on was the fact that somehow the Red Sox were at the table for Juan Soto. And like, yet again, like we talk about, last season it was full throttle. This year, Sam Kennedy goes, we're going to do whatever it takes because we need to win it. We need to win 90 to 95 games. They're like, okay, like he's being more specific, so maybe it matters. But like, here we are. It's January 23rd. And while I'm not going to sit here and say that like the Garrett Crochet thing isn't exciting, because it is, and the Walker Buehler signing exciting, but it comes with a ton of risk. Like they haven't done any, like they've done very little to make a legitimate, tangible impact on the 2025 roster.
Sam Kennedy is the biggest con artist I have met in sports in quite a while. He is great at selling tickets and getting people hyped up to buy tickets and then not delivering.
I don't even know if he's good at it. I just think that we're all like suckers for like wanting.
We're all desperate for anything, any kind of success on this team.
So that's actually part of it that, it got leaked. And when you say leaked, it might have been on purpose. It probably was on purpose, but it was leaked, 6 weeks ago that, Sam Kennedy and Alex Cora want Alex Bregman.
Yeah.
But Craig Breslow doesn't. Mm-hmm. So when Alex Bregman signs with, Detroit or back in Houston, supposedly that's possible again.
Or the New York Mets.
Toronto, the Mets.
You know what? I'm going to say this as a state my take. I just had a good state. I have a good state your take.
All right, wait for it.
That's what I'm going to hold off.
Okay. So if he signs elsewhere, it's going to go back to saying, well, it wasn't ownership telling him no because Sam Kennedy wanted him. It wasn't the head coach or the manager that said no because he wanted him. It's going to go right on Breslow's feet. I don't know if that's true. It very much could be ownership like, no, we're not giving this dude 6 years. So, and that's where we're working within it. But James Stewart came out, from 98.5 and made the comment. It was like, sometimes like you could just overpay. You got to go at the guy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, like I get it, but that's not how it works. Because, and I had someone going, oh, well, there's no salary cap. So yeah, it is how it works. Like you don't have to worry about like, you can only spend, I was like, no, because the only scenario in which the salary cap or not having a salary cap has relevance in the MLB is if the owner actually approaches it that way. And we're seeing that in one team only, and that is the LA Dodgers. I mean, even the Mets could be signing these guys and they're not. They could have went balls to the wall for Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates and Teoscar Hernandez, and they're not. Like, even the Mets are, they signed Juan Soto and haven't done a ton else after that.
I mean, to be fair, Juan Soto just got $780 million.
Yeah, well, the Dodgers just gave out a massive deal to Yamamoto, a massive deal to Ohtani. They have Mets.
I'm talking about specifically the 2024-2025 offseason.
Yeah,
not
anyways,
in general.
Like, there's basically one, maybe 2 to 3 teams like that approach it where there's not really much of any salary cap. And really, it's for the most part only the Dodgers. So unless ownership is approaching it that way, you as Breslow in a GM, you have to approach it with there's got to be some type of parameters. Meaning, like, if Henry is saying, we'll let you spend, but you're not going over $240 million this year, $250 million, Breslow has to say, hey, is Alex Bregman at $30 million a year worth it? Is Alex Bregman at $30 million a year for the next 5 years, 6 years, 7 years worth it? And so he still has to work with that. And then knowing that, you got to play the market. Like, if and this seems to be the case, Alex Bregman is not getting the offers that he wants, why would you as a GM say, hey, we're very confident that the best offer you have is 5 times 25, which is what? 150?
125.
125. Like, why would we offer you 170 or something like that? Like, why would we do that if we know your best offer is not in that range? So, if they don't get Bregman, which my prediction is still leaning towards them not getting him.
Leaning. I'm diving headfirst into the deep end of the pool that he's not coming here.
No reason to believe we're going to sign anybody else.
I'm still leaning that he's not going to come here. Like, then you can maybe judge Breslow or in management at that point. But, like, don't get mad at management for not just blindly paying a guy what he wants when you know the market is not where he wants. Because if Alex Bregman was getting 6 years, $175 million offers, Alex Bregman would have signed by now.
Yes.
But you know why he hasn't signed? Because he's not getting those offers. So, like, you got to play the game with and evaluate, and asking for patience from any fan base is like, it's basically a useless thing to do.
Asking for patience for one off season,
like any type of patience, especially in the MLB where there's like things get dragged out for weeks and weeks and months, and it's like it's February, and I mean it's mid-January, later January, and we still have a ton of free agency that is still available.
No, but asking for a little bit of patience for one off season is one thing. Asking for 5 years of patience and continuing to lie to us and say, "This is the year, guys."
Yes, yeah. And you know what?
That's why we're like.
And I said this like before the offseason even started, and not that this is any bit of excuse, because it's not, and I will still judge the Sox for what they do or don't do. And it's that, this team has a bright future no matter what, because of the fact of these prospects coming up. I mean, they have 2 top 5 prospects, and that does not include Marcel Mayer.
They better hit, dude. All those
exactly. And there's a chance that one of the 3 don't hit. But I don't know, maybe even 2 of the 3. But there's a really good chance that at least one of them end up a star. And there's a real chance that all 3 of them end up major league players, and maybe 2 or all 3 end up really good players. I mean, Anthony at this point is one of the safest bets out there in terms of being a potential star. Campbell's
no longer the number 1 prospect in baseball, though.
Yeah, fuck that, dude.
Yeah,
because he's
technically a prospect to get out of here.
Because he's technically he wasn't like a free agent signing, which is interesting because he's not technically eligible for a full deal. He's considered a minor league player because he doesn't play enough years in Japan. He is technically for now the number 1 prospect.
Even Yoshida was a prospect for the first month or 2 of the season.
Yeah.
when he signed.
Okay.
It's just because they haven't played in the It just, I don't know. It's stupid. Yamamoto was the same way last year for the first 2 months.
Yeah.
But,
Um,
anyways, it's just they have a bright future regardless. So that's the optimistic viewpoint that even if they went into the season, I know Fangraphs did a thing, they released it today, and it was they added the projected WARs for next year at November 6th, and then they added the projected WARs for all the teams this year, at this time now, and the Sox have added the third most WAR, projected WAR. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean jack shit in the end if they don't live up to that, but they've obviously improved.
Yeah.
So, if they can add a solid right-handed bat and one more reliever, I think we'll be in a decent spot this year. But if they don't go out there and add anybody else, I mean, it's tough to look at this offseason and say it was a home run success. I mean, if things ended right now, where would you grade it?
C-. D+.
Yeah. See, I would. So I would say C- with the caveat that if you extend Garrett Crochet,
Just gonna say that would bring my rating up.
yeah.
A lot.
So, and just to go talk about money, so Red Sox payroll on X has updated the Google sheet, and as it stands right now, they are sitting at $208.86 million in payroll for 2026, which
25 or 26.
What did I say? 26? 2025.
Yeah.
Sorry. The 2026 number is a lot lower than that. For 2025, they're at $208.86 million in spend, which I'd have to dig back and see if there's actually, wait a minute. So in 2024, it's archived. So 2024, they spent $226 million in a year ago, which tells me that if they do anything in terms of spend, you're looking at probably you're going to get one guy at $16 million or two guys at $8 million in that ballpark, which means they're probably not signing an impact bat. They might get an impact reliever because top relievers make, in the mid-teens typically. I know that some of those guys like Tanner Scott just got 4 years and $72 million, which is
they could get a good reliever on the market right now for $7 to $9 million.
Yeah. So but you're not going to get an impactful right-handed bat for that amount of money.
No. I mean, it's also entirely possible that they theoretically could add one of these via trade. And so
correct. But
that's a possibility, and we don't really want to go down that route necessarily. But yeah, I mean, it's possible that they add a bat or a pitcher via trade.
Yeah.
I mean, we just heard Ryan Presley was supposedly being moved to Chicago, but now he might not waive his trade clause. So that's a guy that theoretically would make sense for Boston.
Yeah.
Another reliever. I think he's on an expiring deal, so he probably wouldn't cost much. I think he's making 13 this year, which would be a little bit on the high side for him. But Ryan Presley.
Oh.
But he's a proven good reliever. So 1 year, $13 million really isn't too crazy for him.
No, but based on the payroll number, I wouldn't expect them to make a big.
Yeah, but what's the tax at now? The tax was, I think, 232 last year. It's going to be 236, 237.
So last year it was 237. This year it's 241.
Okay, so yeah, so they got 30.
Right, but okay.
But ways to go if Sam wants to keep
So historically speaking, okay, in 2023 they were roughly $8 million under the luxury tax. In 2022 they were over. 2021 they were right under. They were $26 million under the luxury tax in 2020. So and then last year they were 11 million under. So historically speaking, they're not going to be they're not going to spend a ton more money. they like to be under the luxury tax by, at least in the last 2 years, they've been under the luxury tax by a sizable number. So I would say at best, you're looking at $16 to $20 million. Like you can expect if they're going to spend more money, it's somewhere in the upper teens because they want to stay under the luxury tax, because apparently the new thing from ownership is even during the season, they don't want to exceed the luxury tax. So if they stay under it to go into the season, it gives Breslow the flexibility to add talent if they're competing without going over whatever limit is being imposed on him by ownership. So I don't expect a ton of money. My gut tells me that they have no interest in signing Garrett Crochet to an extension anytime soon.
I was just going to ask, what are your?
I disagree there. I think that they're right now they're just focused. I mean, these usually player extensions don't happen until spring training. Though I
would hope that we would hear something within the next 30 days. February 3rd, I think. I'd have to look at the calendar, but we're roughly 2 to 2.5 weeks away from, and I think it's earlier than that. I think the truck leaves for Florida in a week and a half, and spring training starts in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So
I'm planning to go down to visit my grandfather in late March, and I'm hoping to catch a spring training game while I'm there.
I'll have to look at the spring training schedule. I'll be in March from the 6th to the 12th.
Oh no, I'm later in March. But yeah, no, we'll see how things play out. Obviously, with this team, it's tough to kind of gauge, and every time we record, I'm like, all right, well, next time, hopefully, we'll have some Red Sox news, and we never fucking do.
6 weeks. 6 weeks later, we're 6 weeks later, we're still waiting on news.
Yeah, no.
All right, let's finish up with state your takes. Ben, you said you got yours ready, so I'll let you start us off here.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a troll take, but I'm just gonna come out and say that I think Alex Bregman signs with the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Jesus fucking Christ! I'll shoot someone, dude.
They probably have a hole somewhere that hasn't been filled. Maybe it's on the 7th bench position. But apparently they're shelling out money hand over fist.
I mean, at this point, you might as well just keep going.
At this point, why stop? Just give Bregman the 6-year, $200 million deal he wants.
194 of it.
Yeah,
defer
the money and say it's going to be an endowment for when his kids are old enough to go to college. They'll pay his kids' college fund. No, I think I don't in my heart of hearts believe that is more of a troll thing. So a subsequent one that I'll stick to is that I do believe that the reign of our mental terror will end this weekend, and the Buffalo Bills will knock off the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game.
All right. I mean, I hope it's true.
Yeah, one can hope.
Zach, what about you?
I got one. So earlier in the year, I had I'll call it a lukewarm, I guess, take that Montgomery was going to be fired, and that was not my hottest of takes because it was pretty apparent that he was going to be. I think this offseason is the year that finally Don Sweeney and Cam Neely are also fired. I've been calling for it for a number of years that both of them should be gone. Starting with Don's, and this has been beaten into the ground like you can't believe, but starting with Don's first draft in 2015, 10 years later,
so bad,
dude. 10 years later, still no cups.
Matt Barzal sitting right there, and you don't take him.
Barzal, Connor Cook, Thomas Chabot go 1, 2, 3 right after us after we picked 3 career AHLers. But I digress. Cam Neely is just he's a legend in Boston. He's done exactly what Larry Bird didn't want to do and didn't want to, have his legacy tarnished by poor decisions and everything else. So he went to Indiana. Cam Neely has not ruined, but he's definitely tarnished a little bit of his legacy here in Boston by how he's so poorly run the organization. And with the two major signings of 80 plus million or so dollars that Don Sweeney shelled out for Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, who have just not been good. Elias Lindholm is a third line center at this point, and I think Zadorov is a 3D. Ownership's going to be like, what are you doing? You're spending money left and right. You're up against the cap every single year, and we don't have any secondary scoring. It's always been the case for this team. And you're either a one and done or you're a two and done in the playoffs every single year, and you might even miss the playoffs this year. So that being said, Don and Cam Neely finally fired this offseason. Is my state your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a little bit notable at the deadline here. I don't think they're going to allow him to trade any future firsts.
Yeah,
we'll see how much they unload, but yeah, I mean, I could certainly see both of them out the door at this point. Things have gone downhill that much. They might just clean house.
Quick follow up to that. Zach, true or false, Brad Marchand will be a Bruin after the trade deadline?
I hope it's false. I hope he gets traded, but I fight with my friends all the time about that. So
yeah, I don't think he'll get traded, but I mean, if they get the right offer, they certainly should consider it.
Yeah.
For myself, going back and forth on this one for a little bit, and it's going to be that the Red Sox have another trade in their pocket. To what degree, I'm not entirely sure, but I get the sense that maybe they don't want to spend as much. But I know the pressure is still on Breslow to create a winning team, and so I think he's going to be pull the trigger on another trade in the coming weeks, and whether that's a reliever or a situation where they land like the Tyler O'Neill that they added last year, where it's maybe an undervalued right-handed bat, and that's who they end up adding. Off the top of my head, I'm not really sure who that is, but nevertheless, I'm going to go with that. I think that they're going to make one more notable trade before the deadline. And, I'll also toss into that is I think that they will extend Crochet, and I think that they will extend Christian Campbell before the season starts. Mostly Crochet, but I think Campbell has a chance. I want them to extend Roman Anthony, but I don't know if he's going to want to.
For the trade, do you think it's something that they already kind of have in the works and they're just waiting to pull the trigger, or do you think it's more of a Crochet thing and someone like a Bregman, for example, gets signed and then they pivot and kind of panic a little bit and go to
I'm sure that they've talked around the league for a variety of different trades and stuff like that. And so, maybe, okay, like Bregman signs elsewhere. So now they pivot to a different move, something like that. Like we saw, like, Fried signed elsewhere and they pivoted to Crochet type of thing. They certainly have probably a dozen guys that they've talked to via trade.
Yeah.
Around the league. And it's just a matter of, okay, now is the time we're going to pull the trigger. So, that will be mine. So, all right, that's going to do it for this week.
One
final word, Ben?
Yeah, final word. It was just reported about 20 minutes ago that the Astros and Bregman have re-engaged contract talks, and that the Astros are apparently still willing to go up to their max offer, which he initially rejected. For those who don't recall or don't pay attention, their initial offer to him that he said no to was a 6-year, $156 million contract. Whether that ends up being what he signs for, if he signs with them, yet to be seen. But the initial report is that they are most likely unwilling to budge off of that offer, but that as of 20 minutes ago, New York Times and The Athletic, the Astros and Bregman have re-engaged in contract talks.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see. Maybe next week we'll finally have an answer to the Bregman saga. All right.
Probably not. Don't hold your breath.
No. Probably not until like mid-February at this point.
Yep.
All right. We're Raise the Banner. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Go Celtics, Bruins, Red Sox.
Go Sports.
Patriots, and mostly go Revolution. Goodbye.
Goodbye.